The OSG Sports app is up and running on your Android or iPhone. All you got to do, install the OSG Sports app and listen to our podcast from college football, soccer, lacrosse. Let's get this done. Get the OSG Sports app today.
What makes college football special? It's the rivalries and trophy games, from the brass lantern to the oil can. It's college football's rivalries and trophy games. Here's your host, the online sports guys.
This is the time of year when you start bumping into folks that don't like you from 1939. These are the days when you go to snake pits. Old foes, tradition, legacy, it all shows up. But it's a wonderful, warm time of year because generations come back together one more time.
That's the late, great Keith Jackson setting the tone for this weekend as it's rivalry week in college football. John Wilkerson here with you. We're glad you're joining our podcast. John Nelson and Phil Canner will be by a little later. This is the weekend of Ohio State, Michigan, of the Iron Bowl, of Bedlam in Oklahoma, the Egg Bowl in Mississippi, the Commonwealth Cup in Virginia, and the University of Virginia is trying to stop a 15-game losing streak to their in-state rivals, Virginia Tech. And the winner of that game wins a division in the ACC. This is the weekend of the Civil War in Oregon, the Apple Cup in Washington State, Farmageddon between Iowa State and Kansas State. There's modern-day hate. There's the Battle of the Bayou. So many great games. We got so many guests to talk about those great games this weekend, those great rivalries, and we'll get to that a little later. For us here at the College Football Rivalries and Trophy Game Show, this is our Christmas Day. And we're going to start with the Iron Bowl between Alabama and Auburn. And with that, here's John Nelson.
Thanks, Wilkie. Time to figure out the Iron Bowl. And for that, we have consulted friend of the network, sports director for News Channel 9 down in Columbus, Dave Platta. Dave, it's another Iron Bowl. Glad to have you on.
Hey, it's good to be here, sir. And yeah, another Iron Bowl, another shootout.
Do you remember the first Iron Bowl that you ever covered?
Oh, Lordy, that let's see, it was a while back. I remember the one I remember vividly. There'd been a couple others, but the first one that I really remember was 1989. First time that the Iron Bowl was actually played on campus at Auburn.
Right.
That was Auburn won that one by a score of 30-20. It was a great ball game. A local player scored the very first touchdown. James Joseph, who had gone to Central High School in Phoenix City, scored the first touchdown for Auburn. Win Lyle had a couple of blocked field goals, and general hilarity ensued on campus at Auburn because they beat Alabama at their place.
Do you remember the vibe there stepping onto the field at Jordan-Hare for the first ever home game in this series?
Oh, it was electric. It was absolutely amazing. The place was full. It was loud. It was raucous, and everybody was just so into it. It was just like the world, everything stopped there, and it was like that was the entire world. It was an amazing feeling. That this rivalry is unlike any other.
And you know, when you look at this entire section of the country, there's the whole thing about it just means more with the conference and all that kind of stuff, but it is absolute hatred. I mean, I being an all-in in-law, and full disclosure, as you well know, I'm an all-in in-law, so I get to see this firsthand. I've been to the Camback. I was at the Kick Six. I've seen these moments, but for some billion over all of this time, is there a way to personify abject hatred between these two schools?
You know, I've lived down here. I've lived in this area now for almost 35 years, and I wish I could put it into words, but it's just so intense. There's nothing quite like it. It's just the other 364 or 65 on leap year days. That's all they do is talk trash to each other. It's amazing.
And the fact that you've been able to see some of the best talent cycle through and some of the best games cycle through. I mean, obviously, for you and I who've been in the business for a fair poke, I think, as they say in these parts, to see it kind of cycle through, and it literally is a who's who of college football thrown into the pressure cooker of a rivalry.
Yeah, a pressure cooker might be understating too. I mean, this is the game that everybody lives for. for in this state of Alabama, because these are the two pro teams in this state.
And,
really, truly.
Yeah.
And the thing is, one thing about pro sports as compared to college, the following isn't nearly as intense for pro teams. It really, really, truly isn't, because it's like everybody has a stake in this one.
And
you have to pick a side.
No, and this comes from birth. I mean, this is like you're born into this, and insert divine being here forbid that you're born into one side and then something happens to sit there. I mean, to go into the other side. I mean, this is something that has attracted national attention for the wrong reasons. CC Updike, Harvey.
Yes, there is that, but the thing is, the crossing sides. There have been players who played for both teams. Players that played in each program who've had parents that went to the other school. Well, you look at recently, Daniel Carlson. His grandfather, I believe, played for Alabama, and he was a kicker at Auburn. So you get some of that. There was an Alabama quarterback whose mom went to Auburn. You get all kinds of good stuff like that going on.
What was the best individual performance that you've ever seen in the time that you've covered it?
The best individual performance.
I know this sounds like a who's who list for everything that we've done, but Iron Bowl does that to folks.
It does. I mean, people still talk about one that I got here before I got here, but was Bo Over the Top, which broke that long streak. But you talk about the comeback. That was an amazing performance, because they were left for dead and they come back. The comeback effort on that one was amazing. But I was also at the kick six, and he came at me. The video I got from that was real pretty, because Davis came right at me. It was, and my jaw dropped. It's like, did I just see this? Because that might be the most amazing game out of all of them. Because remember, earlier there had been a 99-yard touchdown by Alabama. Mm-hmm. How often do you see a 99-yard touchdown? And then to combine that with a 109-yard kick return, the two longest plays possible in the same game.
And during the kick six, you and I have both covered a rather large tight end at Brookstone who was out there on that kick team, who could have had the angle, didn't have the angle, but I guess as Gary Danielson referred to it, it was like a kicker and a bunch of fat guys.
Well, the fastest linebacker was on the other side of the formation on the kick, and let's just we're going to leave. We're not going to mention tight ends thing, because I've never asked him about this. I'm not going to.
Really?
He gave it his best shot. No, I'm not going to. He gave it his best shot. There was no way he was going to get it, but he gave it his best shot. He almost got a hand on it, which was pretty amazing, because he dove. I mean, he almost made the play. He almost made the play. So I'm not going to bring it up to him, because I know that's something that you remember losses more than you remember wins.
Well, and at the same time, though, you mentioned that this is something really that losses you don't bring up to players, and I think that's an interesting point for those of us that cover athletics under any auspice, and especially here in this situation. It's like, for that particular individual that you and I have covered on the high school ranks and in the college ranks, for anybody who was out there on the field, for the kicker who was at Calhoun that you and I have both covered when it comes to championship games, who missed that 57-yarder. I mean, it's
by much.
No, but the thing is, you and I both knew that leg was there, that Adam could get it there. It was just off to one side. It's stuff that you have these moments, and honestly, as much as the fans talk about them, we can't, as journalists, breach these subjects because they're so sore.
Yeah, they're difficult for the player, because they keep thinking, what could I have done? And quite frankly, that kick was an awesome kick. It was just a little off, not by much. He was a little bit short and a little bit to the right. But how many guys in the conference could have actually made that kick? Mm-hmm. He might have been the only one at the time playing in the SEC that even had a shot at making that kick.
And then we look at the coaches that have been through this. You obviously you look at Nick Saban, you look at what we're seeing with Gus Malzahn now, and both frustrate their fan bases regardless of this week. The other 364 days or 65, they frustrate their fan bases because they deal in the extremes. You're talking Pat Dye, you're talking about Nick Saban, you're talking about just the legends that have come through when it comes to these coaches and seeing these guys 365 days a year. What's it been like from your perspective to be around these coaches?
These coaches, it's amazing because they try to forget about this game because you have to concentrate on you have to eat what's set before you, right?
Yeah.
And they've got other great teams you have to face every year, LSU's and Georgia's, and the Tennessee's back when Tennessee was good, and you have to deal with those. You can't, but in the back of their minds, there's this thing called the Iron Bowl. It just overshadows everything, and it just kind of whispers in their ear, Iron Bowl, and you have to forget about it. And it is so hard to do. These guys manage to do it, but it's always there.
And I guess the fans, I keep going back to the idiot and poisoning of trees and the scope of what it means, this particular game, and how folks take this sometimes. You mentioned that this is the pro sport of Alabama and how it is taken so seriously and to the extremes. Have you had fan interactions that have gone top, whether you're doing a live shot or shooting video or anything like that, where things have gone over the top, either on an Auburn campus or covering an Iron Bowl?
Absolutely, everybody has. That is going to happen because you add tailgating in, and everybody had a really good time before the game, and so people can get out of hand. I try not to dwell on those things. There was one anchor in Birmingham who was doing a live shot before the game, and somebody jumped up in front of him and started jumping around and screaming, and he basically did a WWE takedown on the guy.
Nice.
It was beautiful. It was beautiful. I mean, just boom, and then the guy gets hauled off, and the gentleman did it, brushed himself off, and continued with his live shot. It was like, that's how it's done.
Nice.
Yes, it was great.
I did not know this story, but it does not surprise me.
Yeah, that happened at Auburn, and it was very well done. It was pretty incredible. I was maximally impressed. It was like, yes, that's how it's done.
So when you're looking at the game this year, I know there are a bunch of subplots here. You're dealing on the Auburn side with a freshman quarterback, a running game that with Booby Whitlow, and for the nation, it's okay to say Booby.
Yeah,
you can say Booby. It's
easier than Jatarvius.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. And I've heard multiple people mess up Jatarvius.
Yes, I have myself, and I covered him in high school.
So it's like it's okay. It's Booby Whitlow. You can do that.
Yeah.
But you have the subplots of the offense. You have one of the nastiest front sevens in the country with what Kevin Steele has been able to do. You have the injuries with Alabama at quarterback. You have Mac Jones, who is now caretaker in charge behind center, and all of these different subplots. What are you looking at in this one?
What I'm looking at is we'll see how Mac Jones can react to what I think is probably the best front line in college football. Jones is a good quarterback. He's good. He's not Tua, but he's good. This kid's good. He can play. Keep that in mind. He can play. He wouldn't be at Alabama if he couldn't. But you got to deal with Marlon Davidson and Derek Brown, especially those two.
He's a bad man, by the way.
They both are. They're both incredible athletes, and having both of them makes a lot of difference.
And you have a guy like Big Cat Bryant who's come up from Crisp down in Cordele, and as much as we make fun of Jatarvius Whitlow, you look at Big Cat Bryant, and really, honestly, you sit there and you say, well, he is the Marcaviest of all of the Bryants. He is. You have Marcavier, and Marcaviest, so therefore he is Big Cat Bryant. Yep. And then you have the linebacking core with KJ Britt, and you've seen Owen Papo from Grayson High School emerge, and Jacoby McLean from Valdosta. I can't impress on people enough what Kevin Steele has done with this front seven.
He's just they're monsters. They just really are. They are the best in the country. There's absolutely no question about it. They gave LSU fits, and LSU's ripped up pretty much everybody else. The Auburn defense is scary. It is scary good. And what Jones will be able to do against them is the question. Of course, he's got all those great wide receivers, but you have to be able to throw the ball first. Mm-hmm. You've got to be able to get they're going to get in there because Alabama's offensive line is good. It's solid. It's really good. But can they hold these guys off? That's the big question.
Offensively, for Auburn, other than the defense, and I feel like we're doing an episode of Tide and Tigers here, except it's on audio. When you look at the offense of Auburn, you're dealing with a freshman quarterback who I feel at times has been clamped down to basically you're going to run this play and you don't have the freedom to ad-lib. I think at times that holds Auburn back offensively.
Yeah, but remember, he's still a true freshman, and he still is learning the offense. Now, granted, he had some pretty good coaching by a guy who played some pretty good quarterback back in his day too. But you still have to learn the offense. But they're deep enough into the season now where Nix is being given a lot more freedom to do what he needs to do. Part of it at the beginning, though, you got to get your feet wet and kind of figure out what's going on. I don't care if you were Mr. Football in Alabama. This is the SEC, and that's a whole nother world.
What kind of a game are you expecting?
I think we'll see early on how it's going to develop. I don't know. The funny thing is, I haven't really thought about what kind of a game to expect, because this is one of those games where it's like you just throw it out. Whatever happens early doesn't mean it's going to happen late too. Teams come back. This is the blood rivalry, which is where everybody's going to leave it all on the field, expect to see the unexpected, and never expect to see anybody throw in the towel, especially with teams this talented, this good, with these kinds of expectations they had going into the season and the pride that's involved in this.
Okay. So before we go, once again, Dave Platta, sports director, News Channel 9 in Columbus, hanging out with us here on the OSG on CFB. All right. So story time with Nelson. Do you want my comeback story or do you want my kick six story?
I kind of want to hear both of them, man.
Okay. All right. So comeback. The boss and I go as civilians. And we go.
What's that like, by the way?
Yes, that's my wife, the boss. Yes. Auburn grad.
Well, the civilian part. I'm talking the civilian part.
Oh, yeah. No, the civilian part. When you're working on Friday and you're brain dead on Saturday, trying to focus on the road and trying to get from point A to point B. Going civilian and sitting up on the rafters, first half happens, and the boss is ready to go. She's so frustrated about what she has seen in front of her. She's like, if we leave now, we can beat traffic, we can get home in a decent hour. I turned to her and I said, first off, you're a second half team. Second, you had some of your defensive starters who were suspended for the first half of the game. They're going to come back in the second half, and they won't have had any reps. I think you'll be okay. And we all know what happened in the second half of that game.
Yes. Now, yes, we got to see Lutzy do his dance.
Yeah,
yes.
That just makes my heart hurt. Kick six story. Once again, as a civilian, sitting in the family seats, boss is sitting to my immediate right, and then our two nieces are sitting to her immediate right. Last play of the game, as there's a second put back on the clock, she sees Chris Davis going, deep underneath the goalpost. And she goes, why is he underneath the goalposts? And I explain, I say sometimes, last play of a half, last play of a game, sometimes if a kick is short, then they can run it back and see what happens. Kick six happens. I turn to my niece and I say, that's why they put him under the goalpost. That's your story time with Nelson.
There you go. And for what it's worth, it took me almost 30 minutes to get off of the field, going from the 20-yard line to the other end to get to the interview area.
I can't say I'm surprised.
No, the crowd, when the crowd came on, I thought, oh, this is cool. And then suddenly it was like, wait a minute, I'm not moving. Oh boy, how am I going to do this? Luckily, the photographer was working with me. He was shooting at the other end zone. Is about 6'5", about 300.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't. What he did is he didn't get in front of me. He got behind me.
There you go.
I can get through. It's just the crowd behind me wasn't able to close in and block me off. So it took about 20 minutes. But it was 20 minutes of going through people who are laughing, cheering, and just having a grand time. It was an amazing experience.
Well, and of course, you're sitting there going, okay, I have to protect the camera at all costs.
Yes. I carried it over my head, actually. I had it. This was the big, heavy camera. I had it over my head. But, oh, by the way, I was also rolling the entire time, too, trying to get shots of people partying.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. The story came out really nice because, well, I had some really good video of people partying after the game.
So. And somebody coming right at you with the game-winning score.
Yes, yeah, that was a nice little touch.
All right. So, Dave, for those that want to keep an eye on everything going on in Columbus, on the social media and on the web and on all of your sportscasts, how do they do it? Blatant plug time.
Well, all right, here we go. WTVM Dave Platta is my Twitter handle, and of course, WTVM.com is our station website.
Attaboy. Dave, as always, it's been too long, my friend. I'm glad we got to catch up here. Thanks for being a part of the OSG on CFB for Trophy Games and Rivalries. We'll catch up soon, my friend. Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, sir. You too, sir.
When we come back, Egg Bowl preview. Trophy Games and Rivalries continues in 2 and 2.
You want tickets to the big game? A great concert? Go to SeatGiant.com. Use the code SDH at checkout. It helps you, and it helps us. SeatGiant.com.
Welcome back to the College Football Rivalry and Trophy Game Show, everybody. You are listening to the OSG Sports Podcasting Network. I am OSG Phil, and with me this afternoon is Neil Price, the voice of the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Neil, thank you for joining us on the show.
Glad to do it.
It's Egg Bowl week, a big week down there in Starkville, isn't it?
It's a big week in Mississippi, and being a transplant that, landed here prior to the start of 2017 football season, what I'll tell you is that it's the biggest week in the state. And, Thanksgiving takes on a little bit different meaning for these two teams now that they've moved the game back to Thanksgiving night these last several years. But it is a spectacle unlike anything that I have ever seen, and I wouldn't expect this year's game to be any different.
Yeah, I'm sure after last year when we had what I read online was called the Egg Brawl, which is a little bit of trying to think of a polite way to put it, a little bit of a kerfuffle, for lack of a better word, between the two teams. One of the Ole Miss players, three Mississippi State players got tossed after interesting touchdown in a game that Mississippi State won rather convincingly. How are things shaping up for this season's game?
Well, there's a lot on the line for the game from the Mississippi State standpoint because, State's got 5 wins. 6 is the magic number for bowl eligibility. So the Bulldogs need the game to try and qualify for a 10th consecutive bowl game. And Ole Miss is at a point where it's kind of playing for pride. And trust me, pride's a big part of this game. So, they'll come in here and they'll want to put together a big performance in what in essence is the bowl game for them this season. So, you saw the headline about Egg Brawl last year. And what I'll tell you is that passions and emotions tend to run high in this game. And I think a lot of that stuff happens every year, and last year probably got, the pictures and the publicity a little bit more than it has in years past. And I think you've got 2 coaches in Joe Moorhead for the state team and Matt Luke at Ole Miss, and Matt played at Ole Miss. I think those guys have differing perspectives on the game from a standpoint of they'd like for their teams to focus their intensity and their passion on what happens between the whistles and not so much what happens outside of it. And that was something both talked about last year. I'm sure it's come up again, this year in both campuses. And we'll see how it all plays out on Thursday. But, you got one team that really wants to extend its season. You got another that'd love to keep it from happening. So that's a powder keg within itself, I think.
A lot of kids, I'm guessing a lot of the kids on both squads have known each other for some time. They're not that too far away from each other in terms of location. And
yeah, it's the same recruiting pool in a lot of cases. You're talking about a lot of really good athletes that are either born and raised in the state of Mississippi, or you're talking about a lot of kids on both sides that have come out of the junior college football programs in Mississippi. So at some point, most, if not all, of these players have competed against one another at some level of high school football or junior college football. Maybe they have played on the same team with one another at some point on one of those 2 levels. And I think that's an added dimension to this game that is unlike other rivalry games that I've been around. And I think the other part of it that makes it really intriguing is that you have two teams located not only in the same league, but in the same division of that league. And while it has rarely been a game in the standings that has determined who may or may not win a division, it has certainly had implications like the one this year of one team trying to make it to a bowl game and another one that maybe doesn't have that chance, or what bowl game, what tier of bowl one team or the other may reach as a result of the game. So it always has that storyline. Playing it last week of the year always gives it that extra little bit of attention, and playing it on Thanksgiving night when there's not a lot of college football, it certainly has given it more national recognition, I think, in recent years than maybe it's had. It's a sneaky good rivalry for people who don't know anything about football in this state. It really is, when you talk about the passion, the fervor, all the things that go into a rivalry game. This one's as intense as any I've been around.
And really one with a whole lot of tradition and history dating back a really long time. I think we'll go ahead and wrap things up here. Neil, thank you so much for joining us on the show. We look forward to watching the game Thursday night. And you have a great Thanksgiving. Guys, we're going to wrap up this segment here and toss it to break. Stay tuned. We've got more of the college football rivalry and trophy game show coming up right after this.
Hey, what's going on, y'all? This is Rock at the What's Up Falcons podcast, and I'm joined with my boys. My boys in the house. Where you at?
Yeah. What up?
LG, and we have Q, and we have Hoop in the house.
Q's here, the most beloved guy in all of sports entertainment.
Indeed. Hey, y'all, we want to thank everyone for listening to us, and if you want to listen to some great Falcons information, check us out on the What's Up Falcons podcast. Right, fellas?
Right. Sir. Hey, we here every week, baby.
We keeping it real, so check us out. I'm there on Twitter. Holla. Peace.
Subscribe to the What's Up Falcons podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud. Listen to the What's Up Falcons podcast at whatsupfalcons.com.
It's Bedlam in Oklahoma Saturday as the Sooners take a trip to Stillwater to take on Oklahoma State. Barry Tramel from the Oklahoman is on the line. And Barry, I've got first cousins that live in the Tulsa area, in and around Tulsa. Some are Sooners, some are Cowboys, and the jokes and the vitriol between the two of them, on social media has been comical. But that is kind of what it's like on Bedlam Week in the Sooner State, right?
Yeah, it's a very interesting series. Heavily one-sided in Oklahoma's favor. But here in this century, in the last 20 years, the games have become very competitive. Oklahoma State has really improved their program. They've become a perennial top 20 team, and they don't necessarily win very often, but they always play the Sooners tough. The games are usually high-scoring, wild affairs. Last year, 48-47, and Oklahoma stops a two-point conversion in the last 30 seconds. The year before it was the 62-52 game. It just seems like it's one wild game after another.
During this week, we have so many in-state rivalries. There's the Civil War, there's the Apple Cup, there's Virginia Tech. What kind of sets the Bedlam series apart from the other in-state rivalries around the country?
Well, I think the most notable thing is what I mentioned in terms of the one-sidedness. Oklahoma has dominated it more than 80% of the time. I think 87-18, and with some ties, something like that. Oklahoma State won 3 times between 1945 and 1995. So it's really, you don't think of rivalries as being that one-sided. But what's happened is the Cowboys have gotten better, and several things have contributed to that. The changing dynamics of the Big 12. Nebraska is gone, and Texas is down. And over the last 10 to 12 years, the second best program in Big 12 football has been Oklahoma State. And so the Bedlam game has sort of become, the game that the Sooners have to win to sort of get, whether it's to the Big 12 championship game or to stay in the running for the college football playoff or to reach the college football playoff. So Oklahoma State in many ways has replaced Nebraska as the team that Oklahoma has to beat.
Even though it's been so one-sided, is there any particular games, because you've been to a number of them, is there any particular games that stick out in your mind as kind of a classic in the series?
Oh yeah, there's a few, and the one that haunts Oklahoma State so badly is, of course, 1988. Year they had Barry Sanders, and he was a phenomenal force, of course, and Cowboys down 31-28 late are driving and face third down and get within a yard of the first down, about the 25-yard line, maybe the 20-yard line. They get called for a personal foul at the end of the play. So now it's 4th and 16. Mike Gundy, maybe you've heard of him. He's the Oklahoma State quarterback. He throws a pass in the end zone. He finds a receiver who's open, and Brent Parker drops it. So that's sort of the story of Oklahoma State football in this series. 1983, Cowboys are up 20-3, and Sooners stage a big comeback in the fourth quarter. Barry Switzer orders an onside kick, then changes his mind. Everybody on the field knows, except the kicker, who still tries an onside kick. Oklahoma recovers and wins the game 21-20. Just things like that have caused, angst for the Cowboy Nation for years and years. But in recent years, it's sort of switched in terms of the Cowboys having some good things happen to them. Famously, 2014, Oklahoma leads 35-28 late in the game. Punter, about a minute left. Oklahoma punts deep into OSU, into their own territory. There's a penalty against OSU. Bob Stoops decides to run some more time off the clock by re-punting, except the Cowboys had a punt returner named Tyreek Hill. And this time the punt didn't go out of bounds. It didn't go in the end zone. It went to Tyreek Hill at the 10-yard line. He takes it 90 yards for a touchdown. Cowboys win in overtime. So there's starting to be some things switch a little bit in this series, but there's a lot of history for OSU to make up.
Well, going back, one of the great moments for OSU, I was 9 years old in Norman when I watched the Cowboys upset OU in 1976. As I recall, Terry Miller had a big game in that one.
Oh, Terry Miller was a wonderful player. People forget about him. Even some OSU people have forgotten about Terry Miller. He was a two-time Heisman finalist in terms of finishing in the top 4 of Heisman. Tailback from Colorado Springs. Yeah, Terry Miller had a huge run in that game. Cowboys go into Norman, pull the upset 31-24, and go on to tie Oklahoma and Colorado for the Big 8 championship. OSU's only Big 8 title ever. Went to Cowboys won it in 2011 when the Big 12, but that was a huge one. That was one of the 3 times I mentioned that Oklahoma State beat the Cowboys. Beat the Sooners in a 50-year span. What happened in this series is after Barry Switzer left, it got a little tighter, but Oklahoma State wasn't very good. But in the mid-'90s, 1995, Bob Simmons was hired at OSU, and he didn't have great success, but he changed the mindset. And in that year one, Howard Schnellenberger was the first-year coach for the Sooners. Sooners got in the slump, weren't very good. Oklahoma State beat them 12-0. And over the next 6 years, over the next 7 years, OSU beat them 4 times. Went 4-3 against Oklahoma. Les Miles was part of 2 of those games. The biggest upset of all, 2001. Oklahoma's ranked 4th. Some upsets early in the day made it clear that Oklahoma was probably going to go to the Rose Bowl and play for the national championship if they could just win the Big 12 title. So they needed to beat OSU. OSU's not very good. They were 3-7. And the Cowboys staged the all-time upset, 30-something point underdog, and won that game 16-13 with a late touchdown. And ever since then, the rivalry has really been spirited and competitive. Sooners still dominant, but the games are classics.
We're talking to Barry Tramel from the Oklahoman, who's sharing some memories of the Bedlam series between Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, and kind of giving us a perspective and an education on what this means in the Sooner State. Let's talk about the game coming up. And, Barry, even though Oklahoma has clinched a berth in the Big 12 championship game against Baylor, there's still plenty to play for OU, including keeping that playoff hopes alive. Now, if you look at the history of this rivalry, Oklahoma puts up big offensive numbers against the Cowboys. So does OU need to put up those large number of points on the scoreboard and make some significant defensive stops to keep impressing the playoff committee to get in? Because we know winning a conference championship is no guarantee to get in the playoff.
Right. It's an excellent question. Right now it appears, Oklahoma's behind Alabama and Utah, two other one-loss teams. Oklahoma has played a better schedule than those two teams. Those two teams have been more dominant. And right now the committee seems to like dominance over quality of schedule. So winning big would really, would probably fortify the Sooners' efforts. What's interesting is Oklahoma's played 4 games right down to the wire. Won the last 3. But they beat Iowa State 42-41. They beat Baylor 34-31 after trailing 28-3. They beat TCU 28-24. Needed a late interception to seal the game. So, I'm interested in this. If you win 1 or 2 of those in a row, people, committee and just human nature, people say, "What's wrong with this team? They should be better than this." You win 4 or 5 of those in a row, and all of a sudden, as people said, "Well, that's just what they do." So, if Oklahoma wins another close one, maybe the committee starts saying, "Oh, they're just a team that wins close games." But right now, it seems to be pretty apparent that this committee likes teams that are dominant. Utah has not played. I think they played 2 games closer than 18 points. Alabama, of course, has been rolling people other than LSU. So Oklahoma's in there fighting. Historically, the BCS and the College Football Playoff Committee have been very kind to Oklahoma. If it doesn't go their way this year, they've really got no complaints.
Now, in the Oklahoma State perspective, should Chuba Hubbard put up big number of yards rushing against OU on national TV, does that get him an invite to New York as a Heisman Trophy finalist and improve his chances of perhaps winning that trophy?
Oh, yes. I think 2 things. I think the trophy's decided. I think LSU's Joe Burrow has it.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think it's hugely one-sided. I mean, I think it's going to be a runaway. And when there's a runaway, they tend to only take about 3 guys to New York. I don't think Chuba Hubbard's going to finish in the top 3. He could finish in the top 5, but I don't know if he can get enough votes to make it close for the New York people to say, "Hey, let's go ahead and bring in Chuba Hubbard." So I think it's a long shot. He's a wonderful player. He's a big-time producer, but he does need a big game. Something north of 200 would be fabulous. What's happened last week is at West Virginia, the Mountaineers sold out to stop the run. Oklahoma State's without its quarterback, Spencer Sanders. He's lost for the year with a thumb injury. Cowboys played it a little close to the vest. West Virginia stacked the line. OSU threw the ball to Chuba Hubbard. He was the leading receiver, 7 for 88, I think it was. So if you put his rushing and passing together, rushing and receiving, he was at 194 yards. But that doesn't impress the voters as much as just pure rushing yards. So I do think you're right. I think he would probably need to get over 200. If you can get close to that 300 mark, that would be a big, big splash. But even with Oklahoma's massive defensive problems over the years, they're not in the habit of letting people rush for 200 and something yards. So I think that's a really tall order.
So let's talk about the game Saturday and what you expect. Is the over and would you bet the over if 50 points is the over and under line?
I would always bet the over. I'm not a betting man, but always bet the over. Always bet the over. So
well, judging from the point totals from the last 3 of the last 4, I mean, it's well over 50. It's almost 100.
Yeah, so, I mean, we had last year was 48-47. The year before, 62-52. We've had 58-23. We've had 51-48. We've had 38-35. It'll probably be a high-scoring affair. But I will say this, Oklahoma State's defense is very solid. They turned into a really good, they got the second best defense in the Big 12 behind only Baylor. OU's defense is better. OU's the fourth or fifth best defense in the Big 12. The Oklahoma offense will score. Now, what we've seen, though, is the last 2 weeks, Jalen Hurts has turned into a turnover machine. He's a wonderful player, big-time runner, excellent thrower, but he's committing turnovers. He had the big fumble against TCU, had the interception against TCU, both in the fourth quarter, both inside the 5-yard line. If he does that a couple of times in Stillwater, the game changes immensely. But if he doesn't, if he takes care of the ball, the Cowboys will be hard-pressed to hold down that Oklahoma offense. The Sooners score on everybody. They scored on Alabama. They scored on Georgia. They scored on Ohio State. They're going to score unless they give the ball away.
So you can read Barry Tramel's work on theoklahoman.com. And what are some things you're working on?
Oh, I'm working on a story, the changing nature of this series, and that I think some of the things we talked about earlier, I think OU people, fans even, but particularly coaches, administrators, really respect this rivalry more than they used to because of the ascension of Oklahoma State. I think also I'm working on a story on the future of the Cowboys. This is a young OSU team. I think they're playing one guy and one senior on defense, not very many on offense. Cowboys could be good next year. They could be really good.
And we'll look forward to that online. And Barry Tramel from the Oklahoman, thanks for joining us. Enjoy the game on Saturday, and thanks for the knowledge of the Bedlam series.
I enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
The online sports guys would love to hear from you. Go to our Twitter page at OSG Sports for a comment, rant, or just whatever's on your mind about college football. Now back to college football's rivalries and trophy games.
Well, Friday in Charlottesville, it's the 101st meeting between Virginia and Virginia Tech. So much on the line. The winner is the ACC Coastal Division champion. Plus, Virginia would like to end a long losing streak to their in-state rivals. 15 in a row, the Hokies have now won over the Wahoos. Dave Koehn, the voice of the Virginia Cavaliers, is on the line. Dave, a year ago, it looked like UVA was finally going to get it done over the Hokies, but a pair of fumbles, one gratuitous one for Virginia Tech in the fourth quarter that in the end zone that tied the game, and of course Bryce Perkins had the fumble in overtime, recovered by the Hokies that secured the win for Virginia Tech. Now, among the fan base, has this become an obsession to end this long losing streak?
Let's put it this way. I think if you were a psychiatrist and decided to open up a shop, Charlottesville, Virginia in November would be a pretty good place to set up because Virginia fans, they could use a couple months of therapy, a couple years of therapy, whatever it is. I mean, last year was really, encapsulated everything, really. I mean, it had all of it. Virginia gets off to a little slow start. They think they're done. They battle back. They look like they've got it. And then, once again, stealing defeat from the jaws of victory, the Cavaliers. And, the crazy thing about last year was I would go so far as to say there were 7 or 8 plays in that game that if the ball bounces, if any of these 7 or 8 things happen in a slightly different way, Virginia wins the game. All 8 of them had to land exactly the way they did, and they did. It starts to feel somewhat cosmic and like the universe is conspiring against you. And I think that's, it's a crazy week to be in Charlottesville. And I guess I've been unfortunate enough to have been here for 11 of those 15 straight losses and going into my 12th, wrapping on my 12th season here. So I've seen a lot of it now, but keep in mind, even beyond the 15 losses, Virginia's lost 19 of the last 20 between these two teams. I mean, these numbers are staggering. You look at a guy like Juwan Briggs, who's a freshman nose tackle for Virginia. He was 3 years old the last time Virginia won a game against the Hokies. I mean, it's just staggering stuff, and I really am shocked that, at some point, the ball didn't bounce the right way, and Virginia didn't get one. So, you go into it every year kind of feeling like, here we go again. But the good news is the players don't feel like that, hopefully, going into this thing like the fans probably do.
By the way, for you trivia buffs out there, 2003 was the last time Virginia defeated Virginia Tech. And, as I recall, it was Matt Schaub that was the quarterback for the Hokies, for the Cavaliers at the time. So that's one for you trivia buffs out there. Now, Dave, Virginia was the preseason favorite to win the Coastal this year. And should the Cavaliers win on Friday, UVA would be the 7th different Coastal Division champion. What are some things, Dave, that have gone right for Virginia to put themselves in this position to win the Coastal?
Yeah, and I'll answer that. Let me add one more little piece of trivia to the thing you just mentioned about Schaub. Since Schaub won it, Virginia's gone through 13 different quarterbacks, and none of them have been able to say they've been able to beat the Hokies either. So, I mean, it's just kind of crazy stuff.
And there's been some good quarterbacks, too, in between.
Yeah, there have been some good ones. Now, that was part of the problem for Virginia for a good chunk of this streak was there weren't enough good quarterbacks for Virginia. The Cavaliers had really had a dearth of good quarterbacks. Now you got one, though. You got Bryce Perkins there. Marcus Hankins was a part of that. I mean, you've got some guys that could spin it a little bit now. But that was a problem for about 10 of those 15 years. I think you can make the case that was probably the biggest issue for Virginia. But now, as far as what has gone right for Virginia this season, coming into this season, you knew that this team had a lot of experience back, a terrific coaching staff, and I think that first game of the season was so important for this team. To beat Pitt the way they did on the road, that was a team that has had Virginia's number as well. And, coming into this season, I think it bears mentioning because we always have a sort of a State of the Union kind of visit with Bronco, kind of discuss where he sees things, sees things going, expectations, all those types of things in August. And one of the things he said in terms of measuring success this year, we've got to do something that we haven't done recently. Now, they got to 8 wins a season ago. He said we got to get to 9. We didn't beat Pitt. We haven't beaten Pitt for the last, his first 2 seasons in Virginia. He felt like that had to change. Well, they did that. Can you win the Coastal Division, something that Virginia's never done? Well, they're in a position to do that. Can you beat Virginia Tech? That was obviously another one. Can you win your bowl game? All these things. Of course, Virginia won its bowl game last year, something they hadn't done, but you're always measuring on doing something that you haven't done before. And clearly, at the front of that list is Virginia Tech. You got to find a way to beat your in-state rival. And this goes beyond just fans and that type of thing. I mean, this is just something the program needs. I don't care what the rivalry is. If you've got a stilted rivalry that goes that one-sided for that long, it's something's got to change. And you've got an opportunity to do that coming up this year. And one other thing I'll say. I've heard people say, okay, how is it a rivalry if one team's winning all the games? To me, that's what makes this rivalry is strong as it is and burn as hot as it does. Virginia's lost 15 straight to the Hokies, and the Hokie fans still treat this thing like Virginia owns a 15-game streak over them. The Hokie fans look at this thing, and they seem to be just as fired up as they were back in 2003 when the thing started. So, that tells you that it means something to all these fans all these years later.
We're talking to Dave Koehn, the voice of the Virginia Cavaliers on the College Football Rivalries and Trophy Games podcast. Earlier you mentioned about Bryce Perkins. I've been lucky enough to spend some time with him. What a great kid. What a great athlete. What a good quarterback. He's really carried the offense this season, hasn't he?
Yeah. Well, it's been an interesting season because Bryce didn't get off to the start that he would have liked. And for a good chunk of the year, Bryce Perkins, he really wasn't Bryce Perkins, the same guy we saw last year, who was that dynamic player that kept defensive coordinators up at night. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that 2 things. He was playing on a knee that had been injured in the preseason, and I don't think he had the same burst he did until kind of recently, and I don't know if he's still got quite the same giddy-up as he did a year ago, but he's getting there. And then the other part of it is he's been playing behind a really young offensive line that did not give him much in the way of protection for much of the season. However, that's starting to come around too. So when those things start to happen, all of a sudden your confidence goes up and you're starting to make plays. It's very easy to isolate and on one player say, oh, he's the difference. But or he's struggling, he's not himself, all these different things that contribute. But as you know, in football, it's such a domino effect where one impacts the other and so on down the line. And For Bryce Perkins, though, yeah, he's obviously the straw that stirs the drink with this offense, and they need this offense to be good because, candidly, with the injuries and attrition Virginia has suffered in the defensive secondary, what was the deepest position on the field for Virginia, now you lose 5 players to injury. You have another one suspended in that same position group, including 3 starters and a first-round draft pick. I don't know too many teams that can recover from something like that, but Virginia's done an admirable job, but the defense isn't carrying this team the way it did for the first half of the season. So that has really kind of forced the offense to pick up the slack, and to this point, they've done a nice job of that.
Yeah, you mentioned the injury issues on defense. You know, whenever I think about Virginia defense, I always think about fundamentally sound, physical, can hurt you. I know it's been a tough year injury-wise, but who has been the next man up? Has the next man up shown up, and who are those stars?
I think one of the things that kind of stands out with this Virginia team, not unlike its coach, and this is by design, it isn't really a star-driven defense. I mean, it really is a collective, and again, I say that's by design. I think Bronco Mendenhall is one of these guys who is this. One of his big things is this whole notion of less drama, more work, those types of things, and he doesn't really like the modern-day athlete that's out to promote themselves, and he does it a different way. I mean, there's no question about it. But then again, Virginia's a different place. I mean, this university simply is a little different in terms of the teams that it's competing against, the way it's built, the academic, component of it all, and fan expectations and just the culture. And I think he's been a great fit here because it does work at Virginia. I don't think it works everywhere, but it does work at Virginia, and part of that is sort of this buy-in as the collective, and I think that's really been the key for Virginia. But there are a number of guys who you can name, but there's not anybody to me that I look at on the defense right and say, hey, he's the guy. I mean, it depends on the game. Devontae Cross had 2 interceptions. He's been asked to fill a lot of different positions this season in the defensive secondary. He's been a cornerback. He's been a safety. He was previously a wide receiver, but when he arrived at Virginia, he was a quarterback. So he's played a whole bunch of different positions. Every time he thinks he's settling in, another injury happens, and they ask him to do something else, including last week when he practiced the whole week at cornerback, only to see one of his teammates in the secondary get withheld due to a suspension, forcing him to move back to safety on game day. So he does a lot of different things, but, that's just one guy. I mean, there's so many. Jordan Mack, another great linebacker for the Cavaliers, a senior, really one of the only guys they're going to lose from this group from next year, but Eli Handback, another. Both those guys, really leaders for this group, but it's a collective.
We're talking to Dave Koehn, the voice of the Virginia Cavaliers, and so you're doing a deep dive now, game prepping for this game. What are the keys to victory for Virginia?
Well, just as I said, you don't want to base things on one player. To me, it's one player who's got to have a big game. I mean, Bryce Perkins has got to have a big game against Virginia Tech. I mean, the way that defense is going, it's going to be a real test for these guys. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. I mean, they have, I think they've gone something like, 10 quarters without allowing a score or something ridiculous. So, I mean, it's going to take a really big effort from Perkins. I think Virginia's defense is going to have to play a little above its weight class in terms of the experience. They can't have the breakdowns that have hurt them at times this season. The good news is Virginia's weakness is allowing teams to beat them over the top right now with that young secondary and that inexperienced secondary. I don't think that's necessarily how Virginia Tech is wired. Now, that's not to say they can't play like that. And then Hooker can do it from time to time when he needs to, and I'm sure they'll test that secondary, but it's going to come down to discipline. And, here we are on Monday. I'll probably be able to give you a better answer to that here later in the week. But as of now, those would be the first 2 things that stand out to me. I think Perkins has got to get back to being Bryce Perkins that we started to see of late when he had 200-yard games, his last 2 ACC games on the ground, and was able to throw the ball as well. Virginia hasn't turned it over in 3 games. That's a huge piece of the puzzle for Virginia. If the Cavaliers can take care of the football, all of those things, yeah, they've got a good chance. It's going to be a really good game, though. I really think so. I mean, I don't know who's going to win it, but I will say this. I'd be surprised if it wasn't another close one.
Well, you shared earlier to our listeners that 11 years as the voice of the Cavaliers, and you've yet to see the Cavs win in this rivalry. Now, they play for the Commonwealth Cup. So, should the Cavaliers get it done on Friday, will that trophy be treated like the Stanley Cup? And after you sign off, are you going to get down there and put your hands on that thing?
it's going to feel like I'm calling the national championship again if we can do that. It really is wild when you've seen something play out over and over. It's almost like you don't even know what it's going to be like. I mean, I haven't experienced it since I've been here, so I can't tell you. I really haven't even thought about what it would be like if they do win it. It would be something that would definitely be nice to see. And I'll tell you this much: they're going to party like it's 1999 if they win that game, even though it's a noon game. Doesn't matter, man. This town's going to go upside down.
Of course, we all want to know, will the goalposts be safe?
Ooh, man, all bets are off. All bets are off. Come Friday about 4 o'clock, who knows what that field's going to look like if somehow Virginia's fortunate enough to find a way to snap this baby.
Dave, here's a chance to tell the fans where they can hear the game and listen to your work.
Yeah, you can find us, of course, on any of our stations across the Virginia Sports Radio Network across the state, but, of course, on the TuneIn mobile app, the UVA mobile app. You can catch us all those streaming ways. All free of charge. You can pick up the broadcast. And so, looking forward to it. I always tweet something out day of with all the information of where you can pick us up. I'm at Wahoo Voice on Twitter if anybody's interested in following my thoughts for whatever they're worth on the Hoos.
This is one of the better listens in college football. Dave Koehn, I appreciate your time joining us on the College Football Rivalries and Trophy Games podcast, and have a great broadcast on Friday.
All right. Thanks, John. Appreciate you having me, man.
So in the interest of equal time, let's hear the Virginia Tech perspective. And John Laaser, the voice of the Virginia Tech Hokies, is on the line, not from Blacksburg, mind you, but we got him in Maui as he's doing the men's basketball games at the Maui Invitational, and already a win over Michigan State. So a great start for the men's basketball team.
Yeah, absolutely. No one was really expecting that, and this is a very young men's basketball team that probably belonged in this field last year. So that was very gratifying. Things kind of crashed down a little bit last night against Dayton, but Maui is beautiful as I look out at it from my balcony at the moment.
Yeah, and if you listen carefully, you can hear the waves crashing in the background, so I'm very jealous right now. But let's talk football, and Virginia and Virginia Tech meet again in Charlottesville. And I'll tell you, John, last year I thought that maybe this is the year Virginia does it, and there was a gratuitous fumble for Virginia Tech that tied the game in the end zone, and then the fumble by Bryce Perkins in the overtime, and I heard you in the booth going absolutely insane, and it was another Virginia Tech win. Back in Blacksburg, do you guys kind of feel you've got their number?
I think they feel like they've been the better football program for a long time. You're absolutely right, though, about last year. That was a game that Virginia should have won, as Coach Fuente said after the game. If they were going to get us, they should have got us then, because that was a very young and injured Virginia Tech team that certainly made some plays in the second half to win that game, but certainly got some help from Virginia and certainly got some fortunate bounces. But, yeah, I think there is something to that. I think that particularly when the games are in Blacksburg, Virginia feels the stress of that streak and needing to try to break it a little bit, maybe do some things out of character, because that was a very fine Virginia football team last year, as it is this year, with a very capable and explosive quarterback. So, yeah, I do think the Hokies feel like they got away with one last year, but I think that they feel like that's a rarity, and for most years, they're usually the more solid football team.
Since Hendon Hooker took over at quarterback, you guys are streaking 6-0. What dynamic has he brought to that offense?
Well, I think he's opened the run game, not in a conventional sense, but in the sense that the opposition has to account for him. And when it was Ryan Willis at quarterback, you saw them able to load the box, key off a little bit on him, and the Hokies just couldn't get the run game going, and nothing would open up from there. And Hendon has brought that extra dimension to it that has allowed the entire playbook to become available to Brad Cornelison, and then you've really seen how diversified and talented this offense can be, because you have outstanding receivers, you have outstanding tight ends, you have capable running backs, and now you're able to distribute the football to them. Hendon has also valued the football and not turned it over, hasn't thrown an interception to this point, and ball security has definitely taken away some of those big game-tilting type negative plays that you were having early in the season. So I think if I was choosing a word, it would just be that he has stabilized this offense, but this offense has a lot of talent, and I still don't think has reached its full potential just yet, but hopefully will this week against Virginia.
Defensively, whenever I think of a Bud Foster defense, I think of great cover corners. I think of safeties that can come in and deliver blows, and that allows that front seven to get into the backfield. Same, and the formula's back, and it's been successful, and the defense has just really been awesome.
Yeah, they really have been coming on. They've been healthy, which is a big help, and they've gotten better and better as the year's gone on. You're absolutely right about your sentiment about Bud Foster's defense. That is what he wants to do, and of course he has to have the lockdown corners that he can put on islands to be able to do it, and he has this season with Caleb Farley and Jermaine Waller back there. He's got a lot of confidence in those guys, and that allows him to bring the Chamari Connor and Divine Diablo and Rayshard Ashby's on the blitz from the safety and the linebacking core. And the Hokies have really been disruptive of late. And he also has some young defensive tackles. That was a big position of concern coming into the season and a question mark for this team. Some of the young guys have really started to come along, namely Norrell Pollard in the middle, and been disruptive and gotten things started. So just like the offense, they've gotten healthy, they've put things together, and they just continue to get better and better as they are a very young defense still. So each and every game rep seems to be certainly helping in terms of their development.
So like a good play-by-play announcer, you're multitasking, men's basketball, and then you've got football. So as you're doing when you get a chance to do a little bit of a deep dive on this game, what are some keys for Virginia Tech?
Well, they've got to contain Bryce Perkins, and I think that's an obvious, and that's something that teams have tried to do and haven't been able to do that to the level of effectiveness that they'd like. And you can see with the ebbs and flows for Virginia throughout the season, a lot of it has risen when they've been willing to run Bryce Perkins a lot, and fallen in terms of their offense not producing when they haven't. And they've been very cautious with him over the last few weeks, and understandably so. And I would imagine they'll throw that caution to the wind in this Virginia Tech game. So I would imagine that it's going to be a Bryce Perkins heavy game plan offensively for Virginia. Also imagine that Bud Foster will anticipate that and have the game plan to counter that. And going back to what I was just talking about in a generalized term about this defense, I think that works for Virginia Tech in this game, and that there's not really anybody that scares you in the Virginia receiving corps to the point that you're going to have to give extra personnel help to your corners. So I think if you can play man and you can send a spy to Bryce Perkins, you should be fine defensively. This is a secondary for Virginia that's had a couple of injuries, a big one at the midway point of the season, and this is the Virginia Tech team that is capable of making plays down the field with their receivers getting vertical. They're going to need to do that, but obviously they won't be able to do that if they're not able to run the football effectively. So, like any game, take away the run the football yourself, and Virginia Tech should be fun.
Well, like we said earlier, much on the line, Coastal Division title and a date with Clemson possible. And, of course, Virginia Tech, we'd like to increase that number to 16. John, where can we hear the broadcast?
You can hear it across the Virginia Tech Sports Network from Learfield IMG College, TuneIn app, Hokies Sports app, and any one of our 35 radio affiliates. And
you guys are some of the best listens in college football. And, John, we appreciate you being on the College Football Rivalries and Trophy Games podcast, giving us some knowledge about Virginia Tech.
You got it, John. My pleasure.
All right. When we come back, Bill Shanks joins me. We go over ACC SEC matchups after this.
The OSG app is up and running on your Android or iPhone. Install the OSG app and listen to our podcast from college football, soccer, and lacrosse. What are you waiting for? Download the OSG app today.
And we continue to talk rivalries on the College Football Rivalries and Trophy Games show. And joining us is Bill Shanks from the Bill Shanks Show on the Superstations.com, a frequent contributor to our podcast. We need to get you a title.
I've got enough titles. More titles mean more responsibility. I don't know if I like that or not, John.
So we're going to talk about some of the SEC-ACC matchups. I'm going to start off with one that's near and dear to your heart, Georgia Tech. And, I get the feeling Georgia can probably call their score on this game. But you got to like the potential of this rivalry kind of blossoming again with Jeff Collins taking over at Georgia Tech. And you got to like the intrigue between him and Kirby Smart through the years. And perhaps this, and Jeff Collins mentioned this in his presser, that he'd like to see this as a front and center rivalry again, an appointment television, and potentially with Jeff Collins now, with his background, along with Kirby Smart's background, You kind of got to like how this might develop over the years.
Yeah, John, I've always said that I wish that Georgia and Georgia Tech could be more of a rivalry, but that would mean that Georgia Tech probably has to win more games. And as a Georgia grad fan, I don't know if I want to do that. But I've always said every year on rivalry week that, you know, I kind of envy the other teams around the state of Georgia that have better rivalries. I think Clemson and South Carolina have a better rivalry. I think Florida and Florida State have a better rivalry. And, you know, but those series are more split over the years than Georgia and Georgia Tech. So, but you know, even if in this situation this week, instead of Tech being 3-8, if Tech was 8-3, then Georgia's path to get to where they want to go as a national team that is in the Final Four could be in jeopardy if Tech were better. Well, not this week. So, you know, I think Jeff Collins has got to have that on his list of priorities to try to have a better rivalry with Georgia, which means as long as he's competitive, he's going to have a chance at that. But you know, Kirby Smart's in a different league right now, so Jeff Collins has a long way to go.
But again, you got to kind of like the rivalry within the rivalry between Kirby and Jeff Collins because of their background and who they worked under for years. And you got to kind of like the fact that if Jeff Collins can do what he said he was going to do on his introductory presser back in last December, you kind of like the fact that this rivalry, and it really needs to be front and center again. I don't think this rivalry has really mattered since that time when Georgia Tech won 3 in a row in the late 90s over Georgia. And it's been dominant by the Bulldogs. And really, for where you and I are based, it needs to matter again.
It really does, because I think, you know, Tech always talks about how they can compete with Georgia for talent. But the easiest way for them to do that is to start being more relevant in these matchups. And Collins has got to know that. And so I think that's just got to be very important to him. And, you know, look, he's been very brash. He's been very outspoken. He's been a salesman. He's kind of been a little bit of a P.T. Barnum. He feels like that's what he's had to do to get that word out about Georgia Tech. I mean, he replaced a coach who was kind of old school and didn't want to do a whole lot of publicity and wanted the sport to kind of speak for itself, and now here's a salesman out here trying to get people in the Atlanta area to come play for his school, and a lot of times he's going to have to steer people away from Athens. And so, yeah, I think, and you know what? Here's what's interesting though about Collins to me, John. He's been very quiet overall about Georgia. I mean, of all the things he's talked about, you know, I think he knew what kind of season he was going to have, and he knew he didn't need to mouth off about the Bulldogs, considering what kind of season they were going to have. But he's been very tempered about Georgia talk compared to Dan Mullen, for example, who, when he got the Florida job, was ready to whip Georgia's butt, you know. So, but I think you're right. That rivalry between even those two will be in place as well, and it'll be part of the storyline moving forward.
Let's move on to another ACC-SEC rivalry that kind of gives me a little intrigue this year. That's Kentucky-Louisville. I didn't think Louisville was going to be in a position they're in now. Basically, they can get 8 wins if they defeat their in-state rival. Kentucky's about where we thought they were going to be. Can they keep a healthy quarterback? That's been the issue all year for Kentucky. And again, the rivalry within the rivalry in this one could be intriguing over the years. With Scott Satterfield, and if Mark Stoops decides to stay at UK and not think about heading south to Tallahassee, that could be a nice little rivalry within the rivalry. But this one's an intriguing one.
I agree, and you've got to give Scott Satterfield tremendous credit, because who would have thought they'd be 7-4 coming off the season they had a year ago, and in position to win their 8th game. And I think they can win this game. I do. I mean, the Hawkins kid obviously is having a very good year. I mean, Kentucky's defense can be stout, can be good at times. But, you know, what are they going to do with scoring? I mean, they put 50 up last week against UT Martin, but we know that with their quarterback having to be a receiver, Glenn Bowden Jr., that it's been sketchy for them with offense all year long. And yeah, no, this could get to be real good again, because I was a little surprised at the beginning of the year, John, to be honest with you, when Kentucky was not ranked in the preseason, because I'm like, hold on, they're coming off a 10-win season. Well, people knew more than I did, I guess. Of course, we didn't know that the Wilson kid was going to get hurt, and that crippled their season, right? I mean, that totally changed. I mean, it took their quarterback and wide receiver away because their wide receiver had to become the quarterback, and that killed them. But I thought that they would maybe go down to an 8-win team, and here they are trying to be a 7-win team if they're lucky this weekend. So, you know, I wouldn't be surprised, though, if Kentucky kind of got back on track last year and was more of an 8-win team. I think he's had some momentum there as long as he doesn't leave, as you say, and goes to Tallahassee and Florida State. But I just love what Scott Satterfield's done. I think, you know, I know the ACC is looked at as being mediocre. There's been some pretty good coaching jobs in that league this year. Bronco Mendenhall, Mac Brown to do what he's done in North Carolina, and Scott Satterfield to do what he's done at Louisville. I mean, it's made some of those teams who a year ago were not very competitive much, much better. And, you know, even Bronco, I mean, how bad was Virginia 4 years ago when he took over that program? And here he has playing for the championship of the division this weekend. So, but Scott's done a great job, and that is going to be a real interesting game at noon on Saturday.
The other game I'm really interested in is Florida State and Florida. I think this Florida State team is entirely different with Odell Haggins since he took over for his second interim stint. He's undefeated as an interim head coach at Florida State. He beat, did he beat Florida? Yeah, he did beat Florida his last interim stint. Florida State has won 4 consecutive games in Gainesville, which kind of boggles my mind going what the state of the program is now. But Florida State really has nothing to lose. They're bowl eligible, so they got that taken care of. They can just let it all hang out against Florida, and that's kind of dangerous if you're a Gator fan.
Yeah, and you know what? The Gators better be careful with Cam Akers, obviously.
Yes, they do.
He's a big part of that offense for Coach Haggins. And, you know, I had someone tell me the other day, John, that don't be shocked. Don't just pass out if Odell Haggins gets that job because he's obviously got a history there. And you know, if they don't get who they want, they may just stick with him because he's a very good recruiter and he's been very loyal to that program. So that could be very interesting to watch. But no, look, this is a dangerous game for Florida. They better be careful. I mean, they play like they did against Georgia, for example. If somebody like Cam Akers could go off on them for 150 and you know, help that offense a great deal. It's just a question of you know, if Florida's offense gets going and if Kyle Trask kind of gets in a groove, can Florida State stop them? I mean, that's the question. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe. And when I was doing my notes this week, you know, Florida won last year, but I mean that snapped a 5-game losing streak.
Yeah. For
the Gators in that series, and it's not like. I mean, I guess early on in that 5-game streak, Florida State, that might have been their national championship year, but I mean, they you know, they've been kind of going backwards here, but they've still been able to beat Florida pretty regularly. And, but you know, we'll see what happens this weekend. I would expect Florida to win, but they better be careful. They better be, because if those players, here's the thing, John, if those players are playing for Coach Hagan, look out, because you never know what that could mean. And that would scare me if I was a Florida fan or Dan Mullen.
Yeah, well, the one bright spot all year for Florida State has been their defense. They've been able to play well throughout the turmoil of the beginning of the season, and so that's been a main artery for them, main artery of success for them. And but you know, Florida, when they've needed to put together points, put together a drive, they always seem to be able to do that this year. And get those wins. But again, I just think Florida State has just got nothing to lose. They're going to come in and play loose. And I think you're right about the momentum toward Odell Haggins as the head coach. You know, Clemson took the chance on Dabo Swinney, same type of scenario, and look what that's got them. So this, you know, that might be a good positive move.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to wonder. I mean, you know, Florida State is not the job it used to be. It's not, you know, you go from, well, who wants to replace Bobby Bowden? after he's been there forever, to, all right, well, now Jimbo obviously is leaving for a reason. Why is he leaving? And, I mean, everybody, I think, knew that Willie Taggart was going to be the replacement, which was weird. I mean, I heard that a month before Jimbo left and bolted for College Station. And so then there's Taggart, and now it's like, how good of a job is Florida State? And you really wonder who they've reached out to. I mean, they've had some time here, so you know, I mean, the Stoop stuff, I don't know what to believe in that, but how good a job is that? How good are those facilities? How good of a gig is that for someone, especially to walk away from what they got? You know, that if you're going to pull someone from somewhere else, you've got to. If you're talking about an established head coach now, I mean, okay, you may think Mark Stoops could be a candidate because he's at a basketball school, but you still have to make that attractive because Mark Stoops making a lot of money. You know, I mean, that's he's not getting paid $1.5 million. He's getting paid a lot of money up there in Lexington. So to pull him away from something that he built for X amount of years, that's going to be tough. So if they find out they can't get their good candidate, perfect candidate, and I think, John, they've got to look for fit because Willie Taggart, for whatever reasons, is just not a fit. Right. And Odell Hankins, he may be that good fit they need.
And finally, the last ACC-SEC showdown, Clemson and South Carolina and Columbia, and Clemson's won the last 5 over the Gamecocks. And, you know, are we going to see the South Carolina team that we saw against Georgia, or are we going to see a South Carolina team that they're not going bowling? It's been a crazy November in Columbia. Are they going to be interested?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I hate to say that. I wish I could say they're going to be up for this game, but I'm just shocked at how they've gone backwards since the Georgia win. I mean, you know, they lost a tough game to Florida. They lost by 20 points, 41-21 to Tennessee, and they got to give Tennessee credit for that. But I mean, they have just not played well, and I mean, that game, App State's good, so I don't think anybody was shocked about that. But here they are, you know, at 4-7, and you know, Brian Edwards is probably going to be out. I don't think he's going to play. I mean, the Feaster kid, what's his status going to be? You know, you wish you could say that. Kind of the same thing about this game that you said about Florida State and Florida. That, you know, heck, South Carolina has nothing to lose, but I think especially with Edwards out, that's a lot of pressure on Helinski to try to find some other people. And because Edwards is a good player, John.
Yes,
he's a really good. He's an NFL prospect, and that's a huge loss. And Clemson's just got to go out there and keep everybody healthy and let them get some. Look. Here's the thing I think that Dabo needs to feel though about this game. There are a lot of people are thinking probably about this game like people are thinking about Georgia Tech. Clemson shows up and they'll win by 3-4 touchdowns. But because of what they may face next week or what they're going to face, either with Virginia or Virginia Tech, Clemson needs to play well in this game. I mean, everybody wants to talk about the warm-up games or getting ready for this team by having this game first. You know, Clemson's going to have a challenge next week, especially, I think you and I agree on this, if they play Virginia Tech.
Yes.
And so they need to play well. They don't need to have a game that, even if the score looks impressive, is not that impressive. They need to go out there and feel good about, there's something to say, and I said this about Georgia, Florida after they were finished, or before that game. I said, Georgia needs to win this game, but they need to feel good about it walking out of the building. And they did. And they felt good about it ever since that South Carolina loss. Clemson needs to go into this game in Columbia and feel good about themselves coming out of that because they need to have a good week of practice next week, and they're going to have to play well, especially if it's against Virginia Tech. And because that team, you want to talk about playing for a coach like we were about Florida State and Hagan, that team is playing for Bud Foster, and that's going to be maybe closer and tighter than people think. That may be the one to watch of all the championship games next week is Virginia Tech and Clemson because, hey, how big of a mess would that put the Final Four in if Clemson drops out because Clemson ain't getting in as the one-loss ACC runner-up.
Well, of course, Clemson's number 3 in the college football playoff poll. Here's the thing. If you listen to our podcast earlier, when Barry Tramel from the Oklahoman was on, he made a great point about how the committee this year, the playoff committee, likes teams that dominate. It doesn't matter if you win the game. You've got to dominate the game. And this is where Clemson is kind of in a tenuous position because they need to dominate against South Carolina, and they probably need to have a dominant fashion against in the ACC title game against either Virginia or Virginia Tech to maintain that top four, because you never know about Oklahoma, you never know about Utah. You just never know, because of it just seems like the committee wants teams that dominate to be in that Final Four.
And that's why Clemson needs to just go out there and play well. And because look, Clemson plays well, like I'm talking about, John, they will dominate that game. You know, Trevor will be out of there by third quarter, and Travis Etienne will have another 100-plus yard game, and it'll be an easy win for him. So I think that's the likely scenario, because I don't think South Carolina will be very engaged in this game. I mean, again, there are a lot of things that have shocked me this year, and I think South Carolina, after their win over Georgia, I mean, not that we thought that they were going to win the SEC East after they did what they did in Athens, but my God, we never could have expected they would go backwards and have this kind of year where they're going to finish 4-8 if they lose this game, and that's awful. I mean, that's not what you want for Will Muschamp in year 4, and I think we know when the magazines come out in mid-May who's going to be the first name on that hot seat list. It's going to be Will Muschamp.
That is right. Bill, where can we hear you?
We are on every afternoon at 3 o'clock Eastern Time on thesuperstations.com.
Bill Shanks from The Bill Shanks Show on thesuperstations.com. Many thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Enjoyed it, John. Thank you.
When we come back, it's Georgia Southern and Georgia State as the College Football Rivalries and Trophy Game show continues after this.
Want tickets to the big game? Go to SeatGiant.com. Use the code SDH at checkout. It helps you and it helps us. That's SeatGiant.com.
Welcome back to the OSG on CFB Trophy Games and Rivalries, and it is time to catch up with friend of the network, Sam Crenshaw, who gets to see Georgia State up close and personal when it comes to football in the Fun Belt, and it is State, not Southern, Sam. It's another go-round.
It is this week. It is the big week. You don't need any bulletin board material. Do they still put stuff on bulletin boards? I think it's probably all on smartphones and iPads.
Well, but you can't put a thumbtack through an iPad.
No, you can't. So I guess that's where it all goes these days. But
whiteboard.
Right. That's a place where it goes. Georgia State against Georgia Southern this weekend. What a time for this game. They played that the year Georgia State has had so far. 7 wins, the most ever regular season wins. 5-1, best home record in history. In the past, Georgia State plays some of their best football on the road. But this season they've been winning at home. But this is a big one coming up Saturday. They go to Statesboro, and the last time there, Georgia State was able to get a big win.
Can you still mention the two words Texas and State on the Georgia State campus and still not have people duck their heads?
You wonder why with those two against that particular team. For some reason, got the best of both of them, and you don't explain it. I go back to that game. I was in Texas, watched the game against Texas State, and it just couldn't get it done that weekend. And Dan Ellington wasn't 100% for that game. The next week they get a bye. He's able to recover some. He had a little leg injury. Now he's playing with a torn ACL. But just the way he's leading this team right now, he's lifted up on his shoulders. Talk about courage. Talk about someone that people are going to talk about for years to come at Georgia State because of the breakthroughs this year with this team. And he's led the way. He's been the guy, knows the importance of this team. Think about it. The 4 captains, when the season began for Georgia State, only one of them is healthy now. Hunter Atkinson, offensive lineman. The other 2 guys are done for the season with Remy Lazarus and Ed Kearney. And a lot of people would think the same would be true for Dan Ellington, but he has just willed his way to come out and play. Obviously, not the Dan Ellington that we saw earlier in the season that engineered the wins over Army and the wins over Arkansas State and the win over Tennessee. He's not that guy, but just his determination to be there for the team has kind of inspired them.
When you look at State, not Southern, and this rivalry, this is something that really has hit fifth gear in a very short period of time. Obviously, with the young nature of the Georgia State program just on the field, I mean, it's been in other sports. You and I have seen it grow to where it is in other sports. But in the football sense, it is something that instantaneously took on the rivalry from the other sports and amplified it to football. What has it been like from your perspective to see the football side of things grow?
Wow. And when we talk about both programs, because I go back to the beginning of the Georgia Southern program when Irk Russell left Georgia to get it started. I'm working in Augusta in those days, and we were regulars going down to Statesboro, and they were winning championship after championship. Tracy Ham and the Ham Bone. I go back to all that. And so to have seen that program and the tradition that they've had of winning during that time, and see Georgia State in just a short period of time, this is the 10th year of football, and Georgia State has a winning record against them. John, when football was instituted at Georgia State, someone asked the question, how long before you play Georgia Southern? Because Georgia State has a long-standing rivalry with Georgia Southern in everything else, basketball, baseball, all of the soccer, all of the sports. But how long would it be? And they basically sidestepped that question somewhere down the road. I mean, nobody gave a targeted date or time to schedule a football game against Georgia Southern because of what they accomplished and just what a juggernaut they've been for so long at the FCS level before moving over to the FBS level. And sure enough, once they got into the Sun Belt, who shows up in the Sun Belt for Georgia Southern? And if you had told me less than 10 years of football at Georgia State and who would have a winning record in the series for the times they played, there's no way I would have said Georgia State. No way. But that's what's happening, now. And I know it's something that's really got next to the people down in Statesboro because they do not like losing to State in anything. But to see what Georgia State has been able to do, particularly against them, it's pretty amazing.
And then you look at the program in general in the decade that it's been online. It's gone from it's gone from FCS to FBS. It's gone from Bill Curry and made its way forward to where it is now. And, you're not in the downtown stadium anymore where the Falcons play. You're in your own building, and you get to carve your own identity. From the Georgia State perspective in this last decade, you've taken some major steps, and you're carving out your own identity in the biggest city in the South.
We really have, and this year has been big for that, starting with the first game of the year. Obviously, when you go out and you beat a program like Tennessee, and Tennessee is not the Tennessee that we've known down through the years. There's always a contender in the SEC, and the world stands still when they play against Florida or when they play against Georgia. They're not that Tennessee program. They'll get back to that at some point. But before the season, John, I felt like that's a good time to break down to play Tennessee. They don't have their identity. They got very few seniors on that roster. Not a lot of leadership. And you may say, okay, but they still have athletes. That they do. Tennessee will always have superior athletes. But are they a great team? And do they have an identity under Jeremy Pruitt? And Georgia State timed it perfectly, I think. They really worked hard. The O-line put in a lot of work to start the season. And they went there, and they're bringing some smoke and mirrors. Fourth quarter, they were shoving those guys all over the field. And that's the thing that has held this Georgia State team together. Not a good season last year, but Coach Sean Elliott and his staff established the running state, and that is something they've been able to lean on. Even when other phases of the offense haven't been going well this season, they've been able to just lean on that running game and still get wins.
And that was one of the things that I found interesting about Georgia State coming into this game, Sam, is that it's the running game now, where in the past you had a quarterback and a wide receiver combo that could light up a Christmas tree starting back in mid-July. But now you're doing stuff through the grinder, and you're getting 10 feet at a time if you need it, and working things differently. And I think that that's been key to the evolution of Georgia State.
Very much the key, because you know what would happen? Those quarterbacks, be it Nick Arbuckle, guys who could light it up. So they would score quickly, but then the other team's offense is back on the field quickly. this has been something that's kept a lot of offenses at bay, kept a lot of offenses off stride because they're not on the field as much. The defense is what had to come along with Georgia State this year. Early in the year, they were giving up a lot of points. But the defense has matured some. It's got some injuries now. They have to plug some people into places after losing guys like Koehn and Laaser. But that was the thing that really helped out a lot, was the fact that the offense actually was part of the defense. They have the ball, they have long, sustained drives because of that offensive line. And so doing, making history. Trey Barnett's making history, 2,000-yard running back. Now they're all-time leading ground game. And we didn't see that coming from him either. He's been an okay running back, done a good job, but he really, among the seniors who really rededicated themselves during this offseason, he dedicated himself to be a leader among the running backs, and he's done a tremendous job this year.
All right, time for the blatant promo. As is always the case here when we wrap up interviews, Sam Crenshaw here, part of the Georgia State Radio Network, hanging out with us. For those that want to listen to State Not Southern, and I'm phrasing it that way because you're a state guest, not a Southern guest, because I know that our friends from Statesburg probably want to flip that script just a little bit. Not just this week, but every week when it comes to everything Georgia State. How do they listen to the game this weekend, and how do they listen going forward?
This game this weekend will be on 1380 WAOK. Obviously, we have a partnership with 92.9 The Game. We get into this stage of the season, and the Hawks State this week because they just set the starting time a couple of days ago. It's going to be a 6 o'clock start. That was up in the air until late Friday. They got 6 o'clock start time for this game. It will be on 1380 WAOK and on 88.5 WRAS. People will be able to hear State Not Southern radio game on radio, and of course Georgia State Athletics on WRAS 88.5 throughout the season. This basketball has kicked off as well.
Sam Crenshaw, as always, my friend, you and Smyrna Dave Koehn, may you have a fantastic call for State Not Southern on the State Not Southern Radio Network. Have a great call for a great rivalry here in the state of Georgia. Be well, my friend. We will catch up with you soon, especially with the bowl games coming around, because I know there's going to be one I want to talk to you about in particular.
Absolutely. Look forward to joining you as always, John.
Thank you, John Nelson and Sam Crenshaw with the Georgia State perspective. And in the interest of equal time, we go to the Georgia Southern perspective, and with me is Russ Brown from the Georgia Southern Sports Network. And last time we talked to you, you were getting ready for Deeper Than Hate against Appalachian State and getting ready for a wintry hell Halloween night in Boone, North Carolina, and which you actually got, but it turned out to be a great night.
It did turn out to be a great night. The Eagles got the victory that night. He's definitely the highlight of the season so far this year, and I'm glad you're happy to be back to the podcast this week, John, which is obviously your fun.
Yeah, and of course, Georgia State, Georgia Southern, it's known as modern day hate. A lot of hatred going on at Georgia Southern, eh?
Well, when you're good, there always seems to be a target on your back, so we'll take it. I guess that's where it comes from.
This rivalry is very young. This is the 6th game ever between the two schools. So it's developed quickly, hasn't it?
It really has. I mean, if you go back to the very first game in 2014, that was Georgia Southern's first year in the Sun Belt, and the Panthers were still playing in the Georgia Dome at the time. And it's interesting, there's some fans even to this day, but especially back then in 2014, that really questioned, is this really a rivalry game? Or they haven't had a program that long. They don't belong in the same conference as we do. And the fans made it a point to go up and pack out the Georgia Dome and make it Paulson North. And when the Eagles ran out on the field that day, all the business fans, the Georgia Southern fans, were wearing white. I think there were about 25,000 in the dome that day, and easily 20,000 of them were Georgia Southern fans. The crowd erupted. Came out of the tunnel, and it was an absolute blowout. And you just wondered if this rivalry game would ever take off. And then, lo and behold, the Panthers win the next 3, and here we are in 2019 with Georgia State coming to Paulson Stadium on Saturday. And one thing that Georgia Southern fans don't like to talk about too much, but they never beat the Panthers in Statesboro.
Really?
Yeah. They in 2015, which was Coach Fritz, Willie Fritz, his final game, regular season game, they came in there, and I believe I have to go back and check. That thing was in Miles' final game too, but they came in and took it and pulled the upset, and then won the game 7-12.
We're talking to Russ Brown from the Georgia Southern Sports Network as we talk about the modern-day hate game between Georgia State and Georgia Southern. That game kicks off at 5 o'clock on Saturday. So what are the keys for Georgia Southern?
Well, I think defensively, I'll start there because in the last game against Arkansas State, the Eagles had a tough time with the pass game. So with the Panthers, Dan Ellington at quarterback, who's limited with his mobility due to a knee injury, he's still a very good passer. So I think the key for the Eagles is to not give up big plays in the pass game. That is for sure. And as far as the offense is concerned, if they can get something going between the tackles early, Georgia Southern banged up on the offensive line and at running back last against Arkansas State. The run game was a little slow to get started. If they can get off to a fast start offensively between the tackles, I think that'll help with some time of possession, keep the defense off the field, that sort of thing. So I would say those two things in particular. Keep everything in front of you on defense and get that ground game turned in early.
Georgia Southern comes in this game at 6-5. So a win not only would make it 7-5, but how big is it for Georgia Southern to not only have that win over App State, but the win over Georgia State, should that happen on Saturday, to go 2-0 in the rivalry games?
Oh, that wouldn't be, because it's something going into next season. Clearly, at 6-5, there's been some ups and downs this year for the Eagles, and having Minnesota and LSU on the schedule, he didn't help with the season those two programs are having. But no, I mean, you come out of this game at 7-5, like you said, with 2 wins over the rivals, headed into a bowl game. I think the fan base feels good, looking forward to 2020, and Georgia Southern, just like any other program, there's fans. If you don't win this ball game, the Eagles are going to be 6-6, and you're going to be if you're lucky enough to get to a bowl game, you're going to be headed into that bowl game with people asking lots of questions, and it kind of ratchets up the pressure, I think, a little bit. So to me, from my perspective, Saturday's game is a huge game for Georgia Southern.
Russ, where can we hear the game?
John, if you're traveling through the middle of Georgia area, you can always pick it up on the super stations, Middle Georgia's ESPN. That's 93.1 FM in Macon and 98.3 FM headed down I-75. And as always, you can find us on the TuneIn app. Just open your app, search for the Georgia Southern Sports Network, and you can hear Danny Reed, Terry Harbin on the call.
We thank Russ Brown for joining the College Football Rivalries and Trophy Games podcast. We also thank Dave Platta, Neil Price, Dave Koehn, John Laaser, Bill Shanks, and Sam Crenshaw. It's Christmas Day for us here at the College Football Rivalries and Trophy Games podcast this weekend, and we hope you enjoy the games and the rivalry games this weekend. I'm John Wilkerson for John Nelson and Phil Canner. So long, everyone, and enjoy the games this weekend.
You can find this and past shows by downloading the OSG Sports app on your mobile device. Enjoy all of our shows from the OSG Sports Podcasting Network. The OSG Sports app is up and running. Download it today.